I am super excited to have this incredible rock star, David Bediz. He is an incredible realtor from the Metro DC area with over 20 years experience, a native of North Carolina, if I read that correctly and I remember, also a
Okay.
huge investor. And he is going to be talking today about commercial real estate. I can't tell you how many times I have realtors calling me and saying, "Hey, Sarah, I have a client who wants to buy a commercial real estate property, but I don't know anything about it. What do I do? Do I refer out? Do I keep it? How can I make sure that I am handling this the correct way?" So when we met David, we knew that we had to bring him as a speaker so that he could give you guys some tidbits on that. Now, because we do love to do business with like-minded people and we have people from all across the country, do me a favor. I know you guys love referrals, so I want everybody to go ahead into the chat and put your contact information in there so that if you have business in any of these areas, that you want to be able to refer it to somebody who is investing in themselves and their education. So we do have from the Titan team, we have Andrea, who is in our Woodbridge office, and we have Tom, who is in our Fairfax office. David,
Hello.
I'm going to go ahead and pin you,
Mhm.
and then go ahead. If you guys have any questions throughout it, do me a favor and put them in the chat. I'll be monitoring the chat, and then that way I can have David answer any questions that you guys have. Okay, go ahead, David.
Cool. Well, thank you so much for having me, and I'm very happy to be here and share a little bit of my experience here. Let's see if you can see me. Okay. Can everyone see the screen here? Hopefully.
Yeah.
Yes. Okay. Does it say Bediz Group on it? So I just wanted to give you a little bit of information about commercial for anyone who's at all interested in expanding their portfolio of potential business, and also to just kind of broaden your horizons in general so that you know a little bit more about this world. Now, I will say as a disclaimer, this is not the world I'm in primarily. I usually 99% of my business is residential, but I've done enough commercial business over the years to get you a little bit more acquainted with it. And then hopefully I can help you make some money that way too.
Right, I was in that role. So they became part of.
So first of all, I just want to make sure everyone is getting some of the more important verbiage that's out there. Probably the number one reason people might be worried or scared about getting into commercial is because they start seeing some of these words or acronyms and get really nervous about it because it's a whole new world of jargon. But the truth is, there's only about probably 9 or 10 words that you really need to know, or acronyms. And then the rest of it is pretty much common sense or very similar to residential, in my opinion. So these are some of the commercial terms that I think are important. I'll go through them one by one. And then, of course, if anyone has any questions or wants me to explain anything a little bit better, or has heard another term that they want explanation on, just put them in the comments, and Sarah can make me aware of it, or you could raise your hand or something and let me know, and we'll be happy to go through it. The number one word that I want to go over is actually kind of a complicated one in a way, but it's, I think, just so important to understand because it has implications not just in commercial, like a hair salon or office space or a multi-unit apartment building. It's actually useful to actually judge the value of just about any type of real estate or even any type of business, and that is capitalization rate. So hopefully you guys have heard this term before. Cap rate is usually how it's referred to. And I'll go through what it means and why it's so important in a moment. Similar to that is a cash on cash return. Both capitalization rate and cash on cash return are a measurement of the return on investment or the value of a business or a property. And they can be very, very helpful to understand whether or not you as an investor should buy something or your client as an investor should buy something. And just to back up a little bit, we'll be talking about both buying and renting today, leasing today, and both for buyers and sellers, and for tenants and landlords. I'll try to hit on kind of the important topics for each of those types of people. The next very important term is letter of intent, or LOI. And just to give you a little preview, that's essentially how we do offers in the real estate world or in the commercial real estate world. Rather than doing a full 40-page, residential contract that we might see that has all the disclosures and everything kind of all wrapped up and ready to sign, to do an initial offer, we're just submitting a letter of intent. And I'll go through that in a moment too. And then triple net versus full service versus percentage leases. We'll go over all of those a little bit more in detail, but just suffice it to say that those are the most common types of leases that you'll see in the commercial world, and they basically just differ from each other in terms of who pays for what. So, for example, utilities or insurance or even the property taxes in commercial are oftentimes paid by the tenant themselves, either in full or as a pro rata portion of the total bill based on the square footage that they're renting. And then percentage lease is a little different because that's actually a lease that incorporates some of the profit that the business is getting. So, for example, in a shopping center, if a business, does $100,000 of profit a year, 2, 3, or 4% of that might go to the landlord in addition to regular base rent. We don't see that a lot because it's pretty hard to enforce or to measure, and a lot of the business that I do in commercial doesn't have even necessarily a retail component. Tenant improvements, and by the way, these are in really no particular order at this point, but tenant improvements is a very common term, and that's actually a credit provided by the landlord to a tenant to help them to get their business set up in the space that they're going to be renting. So whether it's a office space or retail, there might be an allowance from the landlord to the tenant paid at the time of signing. So instead of the tenant paying the landlord actually might be paying the tenant or reimbursing the tenant or paying the tenant's contractors or providing some other value at least signing to get them up and running with their business. And then some other things you'll just see in listings are gross leasable area, or GLA, which is essentially the same thing as rentable square feet, RSF. I wrote divisible here, but I meant to say demisable because they're essentially the same term, but demisable is what you'll see more often. Demisable means that if you have this one big office space, say 30,000 square feet, but it might be on multiple levels, it might be, different parts of the building, they might want to rent the whole thing out all as one unit to one company, but also it might be demisable, meaning that they could divide it into different chunks and rent out 10,000 square feet to one company and 10,000 to another and another 5,000 to another, et cetera. And it's an important term because it gets into how rentals or leases in the MLS for commercial, which I'll get into, is called CoStar. It gets into how they're shown for what their value is or what their cost is. Property classes you'll see as well in CoStar. A, B, and C correspond kind of obviously to really high end, kind of middle of the road, and pretty poor in terms of condition. So, a super fancy office building with, a front desk and nice new renovations and marble everywhere might be a class A. And then, a kind of a rundown convenience store or apartment building that hasn't been really renovated in 50 years and doesn't have AC might be a class C. So you kind of get the picture there. It's subjective, but also for the most part, they usually fall into pretty neat categories. I put in parking ratio here because that's something from a residential perspective you probably will never see in a residential side. Parking ratio refers to how many parking spaces you get with a lease, especially, for example, a office space. And it's usually based on the square footage that you're renting. So if you're renting 10,000 square feet and it has a one parking space per every 5,000, then you're going to get 2 parking spaces. Due diligence gets back into the concept of a letter of intent. and it's also part of your offer. Due diligence simply refers to a contingency period to allow for you to do all the research necessary to ensure that the property is the right property for you and that you can move forward, whether you're buying it or renting it. So due diligence can include everything that you would see in residential, like inspections, appraisals, financing itself. But usually that due diligence period does end, and that's once that goes ends, that's when we say it goes hard, the contract goes hard, and the deposits might become non-refundable at that point. In addition to all of the normal contingencies that we're used to seeing in residential, oftentimes in commercial, you're going to see that there is an environmental component too, because if there's any sort of land involved with the deal, even if it's for a lease, a lender, if the lender is involved, and certainly many tenants are going to need to know that there is not an environmental hazard present. And I'll get into that, but just a little spoiler alert. If there's anything to do with cars on the property currently, aside from perhaps just parking spaces, you have to be extra careful. So any sort of gas station, repair shop, anything like that, there's going to be almost certainly an environmental component to a sale. And that can be very, very expensive. Just the testing alone for the soil samples to ensure that there's not lingering oil, gas, or other hazardous substances can be $10,000 easily. And then escalator I put in there because it doesn't mean what you think it means. We all think of escalation clauses, and that has to do with purchasing, but an escalator is actually the increase in rent each year depending on the terms of the lease. So a lease might have a base rent starting years 1 and 2 perhaps, and then after year 2 there are escalators each year for the base rent. And then of course if you're paying triple net, meaning you're paying a portion of the other costs of the building's ownership, your cost will go up every year as well. So property taxes go up every year pretty much. Usually common area maintenance also is an expense that goes up year after year. Does anyone have any immediate questions that I can answer? You can feel free to put them in the comments.
I think this is so great, David, because a lot of the times when people call me and they say, oh my gosh, I got into trouble because they're asking for, this type of lease versus this other type of lease, and they didn't realize all the other things that come attached to this. So having this glossary of terms can at least, kind of give you an idea of what of what your client can experience when it comes to those costs, in addition to rent. Now, David, I don't see any questions so far, but and we can talk about it later, but I wanted you to maybe tell me if you have, like, what do you see in the market when you're seeing some of these people? Do you see that if the landlord wants a specific type of rent, do they usually stay stuck to that, or can you negotiate the type of rent that they're requesting?
Good question. So, well, it just all depends. And I guess I should back up a little bit and explain some of my experience, because I think that'll help you guys understand what you can start to work on from day one, and why you shouldn't be afraid of this. So, for example, as I said, I've been a residential agent for 20 plus years. But over the course of my experience, I've been approached, many times by potential opportunities where it could be, in my experience, it's been very small deals. So for example, like, a friend has a hair salon and wants to actually buy their own space first, or rent their own space versus being under somebody else's umbrella. So they're looking for, 1,500 square feet or 2,000 square feet. And believe me, we'd love to be renting 20,000 or 30,000 out of the gate, but it's good to get your feet wet. And you will find probably that if you're getting opportunities like this, they're probably going to be small to begin with. Every type of property is different, and of course, every market is different. And there are properties that are zoned or destined to become hair salons. There are properties that are destined to become concrete yards and or multifamily developments. So the zoning has a lot to do with that. and where you are has a lot to do with it. But in general, just like in residential, you know, if there's a lot of demand for a certain type of property, you can expect to have to potentially compete for it, and you might lose. So you have to know how to structure your offer in a way that meets the needs of the seller or the landlord well to win. And then just like in a slow market, just like in real residential, if a property's been on the market for 2 years, which we do see in commercial, you may have the opportunity to negotiate on the price. But one thing I've noticed in commercial is that landlords in commercial tend to be much, much more stubborn on price than they sometimes are in residential. And there's a couple reasons for that. One of them is usually when you're dealing, especially with larger properties and also office space, you're usually dealing with a corporation, not a person. So there's not a lot of like emotional anxiety involved. These are people who work at a company, and yeah, they know that they're losing money every day that the place is vacant, but it's part of their business model. There's a lot of people that have to weigh in on whether they rent it or not, and nobody's kind of working out of fear or working from the gut. It's all very
They have
deliberate.
to move out or any of those
Yeah.
pressures.
Yeah. And also, really importantly, and this is the biggest difference between residential and commercial, in my opinion, is that the owner of a large office building, you know, has a lot of money involved in that property, and they need to have that property stay as valuable as possible for a number of reasons. One is if they ever decide to sell it, they need to be able to show that they're earning as much rent as possible to justify the sale price. Another thing is if they want to get a loan on it to leverage that property to buy something else, they need to show that it has value, and the value is based on how much it's renting for. And then in addition, of course, if they want to charge the tenants on the 7th floor $60 a square foot, they can't let the tenants on the 8th floor rent for $40 a square foot, because that diminishes the value of all their other square feet in the building. So they are really, really stubborn, and they will keep a property vacant and on the market for 3 or 4 or 5 years. Right now, we're seeing a lot of that because of the commercial real estate market, rather than under renting it, because as soon as they under rent, the value of their investment goes way down on paper. They would rather keep it vacant than to under rent it.
Yeah.
So you'll
And
find that pressure is there to just keep the price up in commercial more than in residential.
yeah, and as well, you know, they do have built into the loans where, you know, the tenants are paying for a portion of their costs. So that helps them. So again, for everybody who's making notes, you know, what type of zoning is it? That's the mere first thing that you need to look at. If there is any land involved, you definitely, just like David said, if there was anything that had to do with car, I remember one time doing a commercial deal where the two owners before it had been a mechanic, and it took us 8 months to try to get all the paperwork to make sure that they could do, you know, everything that they needed. So, you know, do this due diligence before you're putting timelines together for study periods. So talk to us about cap rate.
So I put cap rate front and center because this is something that I use all the time, and it's very important to understand, and it's also very simple to understand. So you can see that the equation is right in front of you. It's capitalization rate equals a net operating income over value. And the word value here really should probably be price. So it just depends on whether you own it or you're looking to buy it. If you own it, then you're going to say value, because that's what I think it's worth. If you're looking to buy it, it's the word price, because it's what they want for it. And then you're going to determine whether that is a good value based on what the cap rate is. Cap rate is not the only way to evaluate the value of the property. Just like in a regular appraisal, there are several different ways. You can use the you can use market data, including comparable sales. You can use the replacement value, meaning the cost of the land plus the cost of building. But cap rate is equivalent or parallel to the third way of valuing a property, which is to evaluate the income production potential of it. So net operating income is exactly what it sounds like. It is the net of the income that you get after you deduct expenses. So for example, and I think I have an example. Yeah. So this is a net income here. This is a simple example. If you have gross income of 40,000, say this is a 2-bedroom apartment or 2-bedroom condo here, right? You might have $5,000 a year in taxes, 3,000 in maintenance. That's a lot for a 2-bedroom apartment. And then $7,000 in insurance. That's a lot for a 2-bedroom apartment. That's probably too much. But just for ease of understanding, let's just assume these numbers are right. So that leaves you with $25,000 in net income. So what is another good word for net income in the situation? It would be profit, right? So it's really your income minus expenses, it's profit. So you could just replace the word net operating income with profit if you wanted to. Now, one thing that you'll notice is not in this calculation, which is really important to understand, is most people, when they have a property and they have a renter and they have expenses, they also have a really big expense that's not shown here, and that is the mortgage. The mortgage is not included in cap rate analysis because the mortgage itself has a number of factors involved between the term, the down payment, the rate, the interest rate. All of those things are very variable. And if you include those in the calculation, it distorts the value of the property from a cap rate perspective. So you definitely do not want to include the cost of the mortgage in a cap rate analysis. However, when you're looking to buy, you need to understand whether or not you're going to be net profitable after your mortgage as well. That is part of the calculation you have to do. But to be able to compare apples to apples across the board, you need to use cap rate to level the playing field for all types of properties. In fact, this works for businesses instead, in addition to properties. You could look at a hair salon, even if you were renting it, and determine whether your cap rate on the business is worth the investment. So in this situation, if the purchase price was $250,000 and the net operating income or profit is $25,000, then the cap rate would be 10%. So hopefully that makes sense to you because I'm going to keep going. Now, in our market, we don't see 10%. We see usually when properties are offered on the market, we're usually going to see something in the 5% cap rate range. And anything over 5 in our market, I would say, is probably better than what you're going to see on average. In fact, a lot of places are being listed in our market well below 5% cap rate. And there's a reason for that. I'm going to get to that in a minute, but suffice it to say that cap rate, again, is not the best determination of value. It's not always the best determination of which property you should buy either, because there are other factors at play. And one of them, importantly, is the potential for appreciation of value. Cap rate does not tell you anything about what this place might be worth in the future. It only tells you what the rate of return is for the income that's coming in right now. Now, you can estimate what income might come in the future based on a number of prognostications, but that will still become cap rate. If you start incorporating what it might be worth in the future, then you're kind of getting into a total, more holistic approach to how you value a property. But in this case, let's look at just a standard or let's fix one term in this equation. We're going to fix the net operating income. So if you find a property that's worth that is on the market for $2.5 million and they have a net operating income of $100,000, then the cap rate's only 4%. But if that same property were listed for $2 million and the same operating income of $100,000, it would be a 5% cap rate. And the same property, if it were reduced to 1.66 million with the same income, would be a 6% cap rate. So you can see here how the relationship between cap rate and price or value is inverse. As the value or the price goes down, the cap rate goes up. And the cap rate, if you just replace the word cap rate with interest rate or rate of return or return on investment, you're seeing that the cap rate, the higher it is, the better it is for a buyer or an owner. The lower it is, the worse it is for a buyer or owner. And you can see that that works in terms of price too. If the price is higher, that's better for the seller. It's not as good for the buyer. So as the price goes down, it's worse for the seller, but becomes better for the buyer because the cap rate is higher. Hopefully that makes sense. This is another example of 3 different properties, and these have different annual incomes, different prices. Let's not use the word market value, let's use the word price, because that's what it's being offered at. They also have different annual expenses. Once you do the math, and if you recall, the formula is income minus expenses. So on property A, it would be 100,000 minus 7,500, and you take the remainder, 92,500, divide that by 1.5 million, and you get 6.17%. And similarly, B and C have 5.88 and 9.5. So if your client says, I want to buy a property that has the best rate of return, which one would you choose? Using the cap rate, it makes it really easy to understand which one's the best value, and that's property C because it's the highest cap rate. Now, you might say, well, wait, I'm making more money with property B. I make $250,000 versus 100. But the reason that that's not the better choice is because you have to put down $4 million to get that 250. And meanwhile, you could get about half of the income, but for 4 times less the investment by going with property C. And property A doesn't make sense either because you're paying 50% more than C to get the same annual income. So by using cap rate, you're essentially comparing properties even across an entire region with one another using a standard metric. And that helps you value not only a property, but as I said, you can do it across businesses too. Now, I just mentioned region. Now, why are some cap rates in some parts of the region better than others? And you'll see that there's a direct relationship between a lower cap rate and the type of property and the location it's in. So a prime location in top condition with low risk. Risk is not just a risk of vandalism or crime or something like that, but it's also risk of not being able to rent. So a place like in Georgetown or in Bethesda, in great condition, Class A property, you're going to see it's going to have a lower cap rate. A property in a poor location, as in economically not so great, maybe the condition of the neighborhood is not great, and the condition of the property may not be great, and there's a higher risk of everything from a roof leak to flooded basements to crime to high vacancy rates. That's going to get you a higher cap rate. So you can see here how cap rate is very similar to or very much tied to risk. If you take a low risk property in an established neighborhood with a lot of pluses going on for it, and it's not going to be vacant hardly at all, you're not going to make as much money. It's just like a high risk borrower is going to pay a higher interest rate. In general, the more risk tolerance you have, the more potential for income you can have as an owner. But as always, there's risk. So let's look at here how cap rate has changed over time. These are cap rates for different types of properties. As you can see, they all kind of follow the same curve, and they all kind of follow the same curve over time. So they're as you can see, they kind of peaked in 94. That would maybe be the heyday of commercial real estate in general, including multifamily. But over the past 30 years, the rate of decline has been pretty noticeable. And you can come up with all kinds of ideas. I have a couple of my own, but one of them is technology. Technology is really helpful. It makes us all more efficient. But one way it helps, as it helps us and it can help business, it can hurt real estate because real estate is really dependent on location. And just like Sarah is reporting from Corolla in North Carolina, and I'm in DC, and who knows where everyone else is, workers, when they don't have to be in the center of town, the value of commercial real estate in the downtown area goes down. And in addition, that means that they don't really have to live near the center of town. So that means the value of multifamily goes down, and they don't have to buy anything. That means that the value of residential goes down, which also can tie into cap rates because residential single family homes are also rented too. So basically, it's kind of as we become more diffuse across the country, the value of kind of key areas as it pertains to its return on investment, it's undeniably gone down. I would say that's probably the main reason, but there's probably several other reasons too. Now, I wanted to point this out because cap rate over time is tied also to the 10-year US Treasury, which, if you are paying attention, is the basis for our interest rates on our mortgages too. So in general, the cap rate has followed a curve, kind of roughly, of where interest rates have gone over time. And as interest rates are higher now, because this graph is, I think, made in 2020 maybe, or 2021, because the F's there I think stand for future. They didn't know that interest rates were going to climb so much in 2023 and up till now. As interest rates are going up right now, we're actually seeing cap rates go up again too, because more people are willing to rent than to buy, and also the return on investment is generally higher. Also, in some cases, prices have gone down, and as you remember, prices go down, cap rates go up. So as you can see here, cap rates are actually going up in the past 3 years, or in the past 2 to 3 years, in general nationwide. So I'm dwelling on cap rate because it makes you sound really smart when you talk about it with your clients, but it also helps you a lot when you're trying to price a property that you want to sell. So we talked about how to calculate the cap rate, but let's talk about how the cap rate and the purchase price and the net operating income can be moved around so that you can actually calculate the value using a potential cap rate and the net operating income. So if I want to learn, and this is especially helpful if I'm about to sell a multifamily property or sell a rental income property. I may not know how much it's worth, or there may not be any comps at all, but if I know that it's earning $100,000 net operating income, I can calculate based on a 5% cap rate, which I would say is kind of the what I'd probably go with. Then it just instantly tells me what the value is. And that's something you can tell a potential buyer. You can advertise, this is a solid cap rate. 5% is solid. It's not low. It's not too high, but it's not low at all. So because we have a net operating income of 100,000, I can justify a $2 million value. And that's probably what it's going to sell for, I'll be honest with you, in this market. You might be able to get a little bit more by a lower cap rate, but in general, 5% is what people are looking for. All right, so that's enough about cap rate. Hopefully, does anyone have any follow-up questions or observations? I'll keep going on, but feel free to interrupt me. So cash on cash return is a slightly different way to look at things, and that actually does include your financing costs. And this is going to be a very personal calculation. This is not one where I can just advertise a cash on cash return to the world. This is going to be when I'm talking directly with my client, who I know is going to put 20% down, and they only have $200,000, and they only have and they can get a 6.5% interest rate or an 8% interest rate or whatever. When I factor all those things into the equation, then I can figure out what their cash on cash return is. Now, cap rate is part of that, but because it includes the other factors, the other expenses, it's going to be a little different. And so you can see the equation right here in the middle, pre-tax cash flow total. So we're not going to include income taxes or capital gains taxes or anything like that. We're just going to include pre-tax cash flow, meaning after your mortgage payment is paid, divided by the cash invested. So if I have $200,000 down payment, I want to know which business or which house or which multifamily or which office building or whatever is going to yield me the highest cash on cash return. And because you're only putting down usually 20% of the purchase price, or 10% even sometimes, but in general, commercial is 20% minimum. Sometimes the cash on cash return can be quite high, because I might put down 200,000, but I might see a $30,000 or $40,000 annual profit. And that's not a bad profit as it relates to the amount of the down payment. 40% is a fifth of 200,000. So that's a 20% cash on cash return. And that's better than the stock market. It's better than, it certainly is going to be better than your cap rate as well. So cash on cash return is definitely an important calculation. And that's another quick view of it. And this is just a quick example of a cash on cash return, you can see that on the top left, we have rent. Total income is going to be 21,000. And then all of your expenses are adding up here on the bottom left to $20,010. So that relates to the top right, which is your cash flow, which is $1,500. And then the initial investment of $48,000 with a cash flow of $1,500 yields a cash on cash return of 3%. That's a pretty lousy cash on cash return. So I would say don't touch anything with less than usually an 8% or even 10% cash on cash return. And in general, you should be able to do a lot better than that. Whoops. And as you can see, this slide says exactly that. 8 to 12 is a good range for a worthwhile investment property. And don't forget, just like cap rate, this doesn't tell the whole story. There's risk involved. You could be investing in a declining market, or you might want to get a lower cash on cash return if you're investing in a rising market, or if you have some knowledge of improvements in the area or the demographics. It might be worth it to take a bullish approach and buy something that has a lower cash on cash return. All right, that's enough of the money side of things for now. I want to get into the stuff that usually is the initial first hurdle in commercial leasing that
David,
scares people away.
let
And
me
that's
ask you a quick question. Sorry. We have a question from Ricardo. Is cost segregation allowed on commercial? Cost segregation allowed now up to 10% on improvements for any buildings put in service after July 5th, 2025. I'm curious if commercial approved. Must the zoning be residential, or is commercial zoning approved for cost segregation?
You know, as I mentioned at the beginning, I'm not an expert and I don't know everything about every aspect of commercial, so I can't answer that definitively. But I do know that cost segregation, I've had clients use it when they have an Airbnb. It allows you to deduct the cost of improvements to the property and personal property within the property as I think it's becomes like a standard deduction, if I'm not mistaken. The questioner may know a little bit more about that aspect than I do, so I apologize, but definitely a good question to look into further.
Yeah, especially with the new law having just passed. Ricardo will look into it, and if you send Tom or Andrea your email, we'll go ahead and make sure that you have that answer.
Yep. Now, interestingly, just a side note about that, I still am not entirely sure if I understand cost segregation, because when my client did it and he told me about it, because I have a bunch of Airbnbs myself, he's like, yeah, you can deduct your sofa and everything, and I'm like, well, I already do that, so maybe I'm doing it wrong. I was just doing it because it's a business expense. I bought a sofa for the business. It's a business expense, so whatever. We'll see.
Maybe that's a great other mastermind. We'll bring a CPA who can explain to us what are the best, what are the best deductions. Later, David, we also have one more question to see if you have a commercial appraiser that you would recommend. So after you're done with your presentation, if you don't mind putting a name or number in there, I appreciate it.
That's a good question. I will be honest, most of my experience has been on the leasing side of things, and I've listed 2 commercial spaces for sale, and I've not actually represented a commercial buyer ever, except in the multifamily world, and in multifamily you would just use a residential appraiser. So I would have to do some research on that as well, too. As I mentioned before, I know enough to be dangerous here, but don't have all the experience in the world. But I do have people I can call to ask about that. So I'm happy to.
We do a lot of commercial, actually. So if they sent me an email, I can, well, we have here, Ricardo can go ahead and do the appraisal. And if not, email me. Since we do a lot of commercial, we represent the buy side. We can help. We can ask some of our clients who they use. Okay, leases based on rent.
Yep. So leases are, and the reason it says based on rent is because it starts with a rent, but then it adds in other stuff. So a gross lease, which you don't hear it ever called gross lease, or I've never heard it called gross lease. In general in DC or in our area, we call a rent that you just pay one fee to the landlord and everything is included. That's usually called full service. Now, it is technically a gross lease, and gross lease can there can be different types. So there's also called a modified gross lease. And it just depends on what is included in the rent or not. So in general, full service is going to include everything, including electric and water. It's usually because you're renting like 100 or sorry, you're renting a couple offices in an office building. They don't know how much electricity you're using versus the rest of the floor versus the rest of the building, et cetera. So they're not gonna break it down. They're just gonna charge you a base rent that includes all the utilities. Just FYI, though, this is a good thing to remember. If you are representing a tenant in an office building, make sure the tenant knows that if it's a gross lease, a full service lease, they are very unlikely to pay for air conditioning after hours and on weekends. So especially in a swampy environment like DC can be, you definitely want to know if you can have clients in your office space on a Saturday and not, completely bake, because a lot of these buildings turn off their AC on weekends, and don't include that in the lease. So just a little word of the wise. A net lease is generally going to be one where you pay a base rent to the landlord, but you pay a lot of extra expenses on top of that. And the most common is called a triple net lease. Triple net meaning taxes, common area insurance, and common area maintenance and insurance. And then on top of that, you're going to pay utilities too. So for example, if you are renting the first floor of a 3-story building and the upper levels are apartments, but you have the first floor as a bar, you are almost certainly going to be in a triple net lease situation where you pay a base rent of say $5,000 a month, or $50 a square foot per year, which is a very important distinction too. And then on top of that, because the building has $10,000 a year in insurance and you own you're renting a third of it, you're going to pay $3,300 a year in insurance. And because the cost of maintaining the roof or the sidewalk or whatever is, $5,000 a year, you're going to pay a third of that. And then on top of that, because there's property taxes of $20,000 a year, you're going to pay a third of that too. So it can add a lot of extra expenses to the cost of the lease. So what they call they call them triple net expenses. And you'll often see that the base rent is going to be, say $50 a square foot a year, which you take $50 times the number of square feet you have. That's the total yearly rent you're paying. And then you divide it by 12, and then you get the monthly rent, which is very confusing for new beginners. And it's also not very helpful when you're seeing it on paper unless you have a calculator handy. But that's how you calculate the base rent. Add to the base rent the triple net expenses, and those usually are in the $8 to $10 a month, $8 to $10 per square foot per year range as well. So for example, if you have 1,000 square foot space and you have $8 in triple net expenses, that's $8,000 a year. Divide that by 12, and you get the monthly triple net expense that's added to the lease. Now, an escalator, as I mentioned earlier, might increase your base rent by 2% or 3% per year automatically. So every year on the anniversary of the lease, you may be paying a higher monthly base rent. That will be included in the terms of your LOI, your letter of intent, and signed by in the contract, which is the way that the deal is done.
And for people who are not used to this, be very careful with those escalators, because David, you're talking about having like a fixed cap. Some of them, I've had clients that I've seen where they're based, the escalator is based on some variable number that the government puts out there. And I remember one time a client of mine called me and they were like, but it's 13% increase rates. I'm like, yeah, that's why we're careful about that. Sometimes it's less. Sometimes it's more. It's kind of like the stock market. So be very, very careful about those.
Very, very careful. And all of that should be identified in the letter of intent. But just to go over the letter of intent really quickly, a letter of intent can be very, very simple. Just think of all the important terms you see in a residential contract. The name of the buyer, the name of the seller, the property address, whether it includes the parking space that's separately deeded, what day is settlement, how much is the purchase price, how much is down payment, how are you getting financing, what kind of contingencies do you have? All of those if you just put a bullet point list together of anything in the regular contract, that's exactly what you'll see a letter of intent. Now, some letters of intent are much longer. They're like 5 pages or 6 pages long. But at the end of the day, they all say the same thing. But one really important thing you need to make sure gets in that letter of intent is who pays you and how much. So make sure that your commission is in there. And of course, it's okay for you to ask the seller to pay it or the landlord to pay it. But make sure it's paid at settlement or at closing, whatever, or at lease signing. And what I've done in the past too, which is not very common from my perspective. I'm pretty confident that I'm asking for more than most agents, but make sure you do it too, is ask for you to be paid automatically without a request upon any lease extension based on the total lease value as extended. That is not common. The most common is for you to be paid only on the base rent. First of all, you don't get paid on taxes or insurance usually, and also only to be paid for the base term as well. Most leases for commercial are 5, 7, or 10 years. So in smaller commercial, you'll see 1 to 2 years, but in many cases, they're going to want at least 5 years. So 5 years is fine. 5 years, let's do a little math here. Can you see my little thing that just popped up or not?
No, we just see
No.
the lease based on rents. Well, if you want to stop sharing and then come back, or
Well, yeah, I can, I'll just do it verbally. Hopefully this will make sense. If you, the value of a lease is defined usually as the base rent, which is usually defined as a price per square foot per year, times this number of square feet, times the term. So if you're doing a 5-year lease at $50 a square foot per year and 1,000 square feet total, then that is 50 times 1,000 times 5. That's the value of that lease is $250,000. So if you're going to ask for 3% interest, a 3% commission on this, I hope I can mention commission rates here, but if you're asking for, say, 3%, just to choose a random number, then that would be times 0.03. That would be $7,500 due at lease signing. Now, if you do a 5-year lease, most common is for you to ask for the ability to extend. And that essentially gives you the first right of refusal upon the lease expiration as a tenant to extend the lease for, say, another 5 years, or maybe 2 years, or maybe 10 years, whatever. The extensions included in the lease are often going to include an increase in the lease value or in the base rent cost because it's already been escalated anyway. And it also, usually you're going to get at least, I would ask for at least 2 opportunities to extend. But what you'll notice is a lot of your favorite restaurants that have been in the neighborhood for 20 years, 30 years, all of a sudden they close up shop unexpectedly, even though they've been doing gangbusters. And you find out it's because the lease expired. And so it's important when you talk to your tenants to make sure they understand, like, we want you to have as much of an opportunity to keep going if you're doing well as possible. Now, most tenants don't want to sign a 20 or 30 years lease because they don't want to be obligated to that. But if you could sign a 5-year lease with like 3 opportunities to extend, that'd be great. And maybe that'll give you up to 20 years of total lease time. But landlords, of course, want the opposite. They want more flexibility. They don't want to be tied to you if the value of this property goes way up in the next 10 years and they end up under renting it to you. So it's going to be a tug of war between your client and the landlord to find the terms that meet their needs the best. But in general, try to focus, for your sake, on getting as many extensions as possible baked into the lease at reasonable escalators. And for your sake as well, make sure that you are automatically paid on each lease extension, because that is not common.
well,
All
and
right.
to make a point, David, I think that this is important because it brings a lot of value to the clients as well. You don't know what the market is doing, right? Like in the last couple of years, we could make we could say that with everybody being able to work from wherever in hand, that the value of commercial was going down. But now the government has decided that they're obligating everybody to come back in.
Yep.
So, for those tenants that their realtors have extended their, worked a really great deal for their escalation, you have worked for that money and you're worth that commission. So make sure that that is not only in your letter of intent, but also the lease. And
Mhm.
just really quick, since we're at 12:50, if anybody has any questions, we do end right at 1. The letter of intent is something that the realtor does, but the lease or commercial contract, David, really quickly, where can people find that?
So good question. So it doesn't exist. There is no standard lease or contract. There's no standard buyer agency agreement. There's no standard tenant agency agreement. There's no standard listing agreement. There's no GCAR for commercial. There are some commercial associations, but they do not provide these forms. I have actually commissioned an attorney to write me some forms that are as broad reaching as possible. My buyer agency agreement also functions as a lease agent agreement because sometimes your client is interested in either leasing or buying, depending on the structure of the terms. And then similarly, my lease listing agreement, it also works as a purchase listing agreement. And so I have those available. I generally share them with people on my team. I, in the past, have licensed folks to use them for a very small fee. I paid about $4,000 for all of my forms. I have 4 main forms that I use. And then as far as the contract goes, the contract, I would just stay away from writing the contract unless it's a apartment building with fewer than 5 units. Let an attorney draft the contract and even negotiate the finer points of it. You only focus on the macro level, the big ticket item things, and let the attorneys duke it out on the really finer points. Because first of all, it's less work for you that way, and also importantly, less liability. We're not trained to be nitpickers on these little details, and if we do something wrong, we can really hurt our clients. So let the attorneys do it, and that's a totally different thing for commercial versus residential, but it's good advice. This is a quick summary of the types of net leases, and again, this shows some of the responsibilities that a tenant would probably pay in a triple net lease versus the modified gross versus full service. And by the way, full service, in this case, they do have utilities being paid by the tenant, but I've found a lot of full service places, especially in big office buildings, include your utilities. And then these are also, this breaks out the types of net leases, single versus double versus triple. You'll see that the big difference is going to be maintenance on a triple net and the addition of insurance on a double net. All right, this is my last slide, so I think it's perfect timing. But some of the key commercial differences, aside from the ones we've already mentioned, is how do you find out information about properties? Where do you post properties for sale? How do you do the due diligence on comps and on calculations and all that? And unfortunately, there's really only one real player in this market, and it's CoStar, and they know it, and they charge a fortune. So we pay over $500 a month for access to CoStar. It's much, much, much more expensive than MLS. And they do, however, take a little bit more of an active role in filling out data for each property, even ones that are not listed directly on their site. They will still do research on it. So they do provide a little bit more value. Their website is easy to use. However, it does not yet have a automated email update option like we do in MLS, which can be really annoying because every time you're working with somebody, you have to literally log in and do a search once a week. I think that they've added one feature that updates you, but it won't update the client directly. So at least it's an automation in that respect. That's the biggest difference. It's also a financial difference. It's a pretty expensive one. And then as far as the contingencies go in the contract for sale and even for rent, there's usually it's just one big contingency. It's the due diligence period. It's usually 30 to 45 to 90 days. Most often I see 45 to 90 days. Environmental studies, as I mentioned, avoid anything with cars because your client will end up paying $10,000 plus to do soil samples. And then there could be major work involved if it has to be dug out and replaced. One little thing, and we talked about this at Titan and me, but In my most recent sale transaction, I was really surprised that instead of the title company preparing the deed, the seller is expected to do it or their attorney. It's not always the case, but it's just it caught me by off guard a little
I've
bit. So just
actually never heard that, to be honest.
really,
When I
well then
heard that
maybe
in
okay,
your
maybe I
prep,
wasn't wrong then.
yeah, no, you were not wrong. And I've done a lot of commercial,
Okay,
and you know, we do a good chunk. I mean, we do more residential than commercial, but we still do.
yeah,
I've done $30 million commercial properties, and I've never had
okay. I'm glad you said that because he kind of made me feel like I was an idiot when I was like, "Don't you
that.
do that?" He's like, "Oh no, not in commercial." I'm like, "Well, okay, whatever."
Yeah, I don't. Later you'll have to tell me who told you that.
He
You
was a
know,
nice guy, but yeah, and also don't. This is an important thing too. Don't let anyone push you around because that's one other thing I've noticed in commercial is if you don't work for one of the big commercial firms, they kind of will look down at their nose at you a little bit. Hold your own. You're smart. These are not difficult concepts to understand. They don't hold any keys to the kingdom that you can't get access to. The only thing that you have that you may not have that they have is access to CoStar, and that's just a matter of buying it, or you can work with me to get it. You can hold your own. Do not let anyone make you feel less than because this is simply it's the same exact game as residential sales. It's just with slightly different jargon and a slightly different platform. That's it. But just to go over, sorry.
but everything is negotiable. So
Yes.
for my newer agents who are doing commercial, I highly recommend to the first few deals, you know, partner up with someone who has experience because what you don't know can cost you a lot. In commercial deal, everything is negotiable. What I will tell you as a title company, we negotiate everything. We
Yeah.
negotiate the title insurance is not
Yep.
standard. We negotiate what goes on, what doesn't go on,
Mhm.
you know. So there are some things, as David said, anybody can definitely learn it, but because everything is up to negotiations, the first few times I do suggest that you partner up with someone who does have the knowledge, the documents, who can tell you what you don't know, and it'll be well worth the cost of admission.
Absolutely. And then just to remind everyone, you don't normally get paid on extensions unless you ask for it and get that included in the letter of intent and the contract. And then also, just like in residential, although this is less common, I think, in commercial, is be very demanding on getting an agency agreement signed early. Because if you've ever worked with a developer, you'll know this. Commercial people like the idea of owning a beauty salon or a restaurant, and they'll take you all over town and look at all the properties out there and then just completely ghost you. And so you want to make sure that you have an agency agreement signed so that they don't ghost you and then buy it around you or with somebody else. You do want to protect yourself because there are a lot of tire kickers in this industry, especially for the smaller items out there. And there was one other thing that I just thought of that I really wanted to share, and I think I've lost it, but
We'll see.
um, we'll
See if you
see.
can bring it back while I give my my goodbyes. Thank you so much,
Sure.
David, for such an incredible a class. I loved how you broke it down so that it was, you know, down to the math. I will remind everybody that if you love the class, in our newsletter in August, there's going to be a link so that you can go to our YouTube channel. And in our YouTube channel, we put all of our virtual mastermind classes. So you can go back and review any of these as well. David, if you don't mind to put your contact information in the chat so that if any, there you go, even better. Anybody has any questions, please feel free to reach out to him. I know that there was a question about an LOI. So I will tell you that just like David said at the beginning, it can even be bullet points. You know, it's just make sure you're putting like the information that you would put in a commercial contract.
And importantly, it's not binding, although it is signed. The signature is there to indicate that people are serious about going through with it, but it can't be enforced, unfortunately.
And that's why the point of you can put everything you want about your commission and the extensions and the LOI, but if it's not on the actual lease, it doesn't mean anything.
Correct.
Anyway, we are done for this month's mastermind. Thank you so much for those of you guys that came. As again, you can find all of these things with in our YouTube channel as well as our newsletter. David, thank you so much. And for those of you guys that want to reconnect with David, please take a screenshot of his information here. We'll see you next month at our next virtual mastermind. Everybody go sell something. Have a great day.
I'm happy to help you if anyone wants to get their feet wet. Just give me a call. I'm happy to partner up.
Awesome. Thank you so much, David. Have a great day, guys.
Take care.
Bye-bye.